We'll start our introductions with Mr. Ken Mercer.
I'm Ken Mercer. I'm one of the conservative leaders of the Texas State Board of Education, representing 13 counties and 1.6 million Texans. I served for 2 years in the Committee of Higher Education at Texas State House and several years in the State Committees for Curriculum, Instruction, and Planning. I'm also fiduciary of our $25 billion permanent school fund, the Children's Fund, which is the highest rated fund in Texas, which guarantees that every year that our children, our 4.8 million kids in school, get free textbooks. I'm also known as the man the far left loves to hate because I have no problem just raising my hands and then asking simple questions the way I'm supposed to. I often ask, what would you do if you sat there and you had experts, and this is a matter of public record, who came forth and on 3rd and 4th grade they brought back the standards and are actually crossing out Independence Day and Veterans Day. There are hundreds of examples of things I had to question. For example, all of a sudden Albert Einstein was gone. Golda Meir, we're looking for women in the Middle East political leaders, and all of a sudden Golda Meir was gone. There aren't too many women in the Middle East. Neil Armstrong, who just passed away, was also deleted. John F. Kennedy's speech will go to the moon, and Ronald Reagan's tear down this wall. All those things I had to decide to stand for, either vote for the experts or vote for the children. I believe the children won. And for example, now every year our kids get to actually read the Declaration of the Constitution. Read it, talk about its authorship, purpose, and impact on things like the Emancipation Proclamation, women's suffrage. And now for the first time ever, our kids, when they study role models in history, our minority children finally get to read about minority leaders who are recipients of our highest honor, the Medal of Honor. I just love serving this office. I love being here. My name is Ken Mercer. VoteKenMercer.com. As always, have a great and awesome Texas Day.
And now, Rebecca Bell-Metereau will introduce herself.
I'm Rebecca Bell-Metereau, and thank you all for being here. You are people who care about government and about education. I'm running for State Board of Education because I'm a teacher. My husband and I were teachers in the Peace Corps, and we also served as translators for U.S. Air Force grain flights to the Sahel and Chad. We had training in how to teach language, and it was based on the military. The military taught us the best way to teach language and reading. When we came to Texas in 1981, after finishing our doctorates, my husband got a job at Texas Lutheran, and I got a job at what was then Southwest Texas. It's now Texas State. And we have really enjoyed having our Texas students teach us and having us teach them English, and I teach film as well. The changes in the curriculum that have been made have not been a friend to teachers. When Mr. Mercer talks about adding all of these names, I talk to teachers all the time, and I train teachers. I was hired by Texas State University President Jerome Supple to help improve our retention rate of freshman students. Teachers know that if you go into a classroom and the state is mandating that you teach a list of 400 names, that's not the way to teach. If you have high-stakes testing all the time so that teachers end up spending about 1/3 of their classroom, that's not helping teachers teach. Because I'm a teacher, I understand the curriculum, I understand textbook choices, and I want to bring that expertise and that knowledge and experience to the State Board of Education so that we make decisions not based on politics, not based on ideology, but on the best that experts have to offer. VoteRebecca.com. Thank you.
Now I would like to introduce, or have Mark Loewe introduce himself.
Thank you to the lead. I'm a doctor of physics and a chemist. I co-authored a graduate level textbook on quantum mechanics, used worldwide for more than 25 years, taught physics at UT and Texas State University, do microelectronics research and development, and helped to develop a tiny 25-gram on-wheel air compressor to maintain proper car tire pressure, expected to save hundreds of lives, millions of tires, and billions of gallons of fuel per year in the US. Details of my proposals to improve education are available on my website, markloewe.org. I wrote House Bill 2959 for Texas to acquire very low-cost math and science textbooks so that children can keep their books permanently. I discovered errors of roughly $752 million in 2 international investments listed in the Texas Permanent School Fund schedule of investments. I discovered that incorrect scores on tax, math, and science tests were issued to hundreds of thousands of Texas students. And I devised progressive school vouchers during the 1980s to attract billions of additional private dollars per year into Texas K-12 education and to maximize the amount of public education funds available for any child. Progressive vouchers would empower millions of parents, including especially poor parents and parents of children with special needs, to reject mediocre schools and choose safe schools that better serve their children's individual needs, abilities, and interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Loewe, what is your position on how to measure and assess the jobs schools are doing in educating our children?
I believe that any school that receives public education funds, whether it's government schools, charter schools, or voucher schools, should be required to administer an annual academic achievement test given district-wide or statewide, so that parents, when they are considering which school to send their kids to, can have one such basis to compare the schools. They may not put much weight on those tests, but at least they would have the opportunity to do so. That's very important. And that's a basic accountability for our school system. The best accountability system is to put the accountability for where the public funds are spent into the hands of millions of parents who have some basic data by which to compare schools. So I think that standardized tests are required, but I greatly prefer school choice instead of high-stakes government sanctions against schools based on government-defined thresholds on government-prepared minimum proficiency tests. I would like the tests that parents can compare the results of to be true academic achievement tests. I think it was a good idea for Florence Shapiro, the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, to introduce and pass the bill that replaces our previous system, the tax test, with exit-level exams in subjects such as algebra, geometry, algebra 2, and also for the other fields. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Ms. Bell-Metereau, what is your position on how to measure and assess the job schools are doing in educating our children?
People who do studies on assessment tell us that the best way to assess is to have multiple measures. We also need to stop using these tests that are developed in-house in Texas and that are costing us millions and millions of dollars for more and more testing. These tests have proved to be inaccurate. They don't have any comparison, so we can't know how we do in comparison to any other state. And they have no longitudinal reliability because they keep changing the test every few years. It's just common sense, but it's also what experts say about assessment. We need to look at how students are faring in the classroom. We also need to look at graduation rates. We need to adjust what we assess according to socioeconomic levels, because that's actually the biggest indicator of how students will do. We need to bring competition in by making our jobs pay more so that students can get teachers who have competed for those jobs because they want those jobs. Right now, we're driving good teachers away from the classroom. We can actually do a marvelous job of assessing our students if we want to go back to the way it was when I was a kid. the teacher would say, get a good night's sleep and a good breakfast tomorrow because you're having the Iowa skills test. No teacher ever prepared us for that, and what we got was an indication of how we were doing compared to other students around the country. But teachers were not punished for that, schools were not punished for that, and the students weren't punished. So we have to be sure that we don't punish teachers for the results of their students. We need to look at how they're actually teaching, and we need to let them cooperate to develop the best methods for teaching, not compete with each other to say, well, I'm going to get the highest score and I'm not going to share with so-and-so how I do that. We want to be sure that we support our teachers. They've done a wonderful job, but we're burdening them with so much assessment that they cannot keep in the classroom.
Mr. Mercer, what is your position on how to measure and assess the job schools are doing in educating our children?
I think everyone would agree. We always talk about accountability, but we've gone too far. It's gone kind of crazy. We're teaching to a test. And I know right now there's even an effort for a national test, national curriculum. Guess what? We know how bad it is in Texas. Now they're talking nationwide teaching to a test and even a nationwide evaluation database of educators. I have a real problem with that. I think that I like moving away from the tax test, winner take all, moving to the STAR test that Mr. Loewe mentioned, where we had the end of course exams that we had when we were in school, where it counts as part of your grade. Right now, the tax test, and schools are mixed. Only freshmen are taking the STAR test. Everyone else is taking the tax. The tax test, if you don't pass your science or math or history, you can't graduate. We have horror stories of kids or honor society kids who can't graduate from high school because they couldn't pass this test, which didn't even count as part of their grade. That's just insane. And I agree with what Ms. Bell-Metereau said. When I was a child, too, we were a military family, we traveled around. And we took the Iowa basic skills. We went to college, we took the ACT and SAT. And you can compare yourself to Texas, to Louisiana, Arkansas, to your region, or different parts of the state. So I think everyone agrees it's gone. We want accountability, but it's gone way past. It's way past what it should be. I oppose the tax test. I'm going to be fair and watch the STAR test, but I don't think we should tie it to that. We should just, again, the best test, again, we had before was the Iowa test, the ACT, SAT. We can compare nationwide, but I don't like tying schools and tying performance to teaching to a test.
Mr. Mercer, do you believe the current method used by the state to assess the dropout rate is accurate?
As a state official, it's a tough one too, because I look at the rate, and I don't think so. I really do not believe so. I think the best way would go, let's go to Wimberley, let's go to San Marcos, let's go to Buda, and let's say, how many kids you have in a ninth grade? How many in your class, and 4 years later, how many graduated? Now I realize people come in and out of the system, but especially in the inner city like Travis County, and Barry County, and Harris County, that's probably the best way, because there's so many numbers going in and out, and kids transfer out. But if you tell me you have 1,000 ninth graders at a large inner city school in San Antonio, and 4 years later 600 graduated, well, what happened? And that's probably the best measurement. So I don't agree with the current method. I think the best method, again, is simply taking the ninth graders, and 3 years later, how many actually graduated, and explain where they went. Don't play any games, but in the inner city schools, if you come out again and you have something in the 50 to 60 percentile, kids are still there graduating, something happened in the last 3 years. And I actually, in my personal stuff, I used those test scores, those scores, and not the method from the state.
Mr. Loewe, do you believe the current method used by the state to assess the dropout rate is accurate?
I have not looked into the methods to determine the dropout rate. I have made proposals, concrete proposals, that would reduce the dropout rate. My proposal to allow children to permanently keep low-cost math, science, and other textbooks is beneficial to learning and would reduce the dropout rate. The progressive school vouchers would allow a lot of different kinds of schools to come into existence that allow children to be better matched to schools according to their needs, abilities, and interests. Some voucher schools could concentrate on math and science. Some could concentrate on arts. Some could concentrate on history and social studies. Other voucher schools would come into existence to serve children of various special needs. And also some would come into existence especially in urban areas, to handle kids that have discipline problems. And all of these things would increase the happiness of children as they are better matched to schools rather than our essentially government monopoly on schools, one size fits all. And that would reduce the dropout rate. So I've made concrete proposals, and I've tried to get these enacted for more than 20 years on the progressive vouchers and for more than 10 years on the low-cost textbooks. Thank you.
Mrs. Bell-Metereau, do you believe the current method used by the state to assess the dropout rate is accurate?
I don't believe the current method is accurate, and I also believe that we need to look seriously at how to retain students. We have examples of successful programs all around the country. At one conference, I met a man who was having his worst students, I say worst, but most in danger for dropping out. They were in his class, and he had them do a video yearbook where they would go around, they'd have to write their script and go around to all the organizations in the school to create this video yearbook, and then they could keep the profits and spend them. They would sell it to their classmates, and he managed to get almost 100% retention of those students. If you give the schools enough money and funding for counselors and people who keep track of children, then you will have a better assessment of how many of those children you're keeping. We don't really give enough attention to our counselors. They're overburdened. They can't keep track of all the students. And I've talked to some teachers who said that they know of people who actually kind of quietly encourage people to leave. Now, when you talk about charter schools currently, I was talking to a couple who said that their grandson was kicked out of a charter school because he's a special needs student. And he ended up going to the public school, and they were very happy with the way he was being taught in that public school. Public schools take all students. So we need to support our public schools. We need to support our teachers who have innovative ideas about retaining students. And we need to look very carefully at how those statistics are kept. We can't just take for granted that somehow 2/3 of the students just disappeared along the way and moved out of state.
Ms. Bell-Metereau, do you support teaching of evolution, global warming, and the Big Bang Theory as part of the science curriculum?
I support the teaching of all of the most current theories and scientific methods that have been tested by scholars for decades now. And I support listening to the people who know the most about their subject matter, not just in science, but in history and in social studies and in English. We currently have a board that does not pay attention to the experts in the field, and the so-called experts that they select turn out to not be experts. For example, in the social studies curriculum, my opponent and the incumbent appointed Mr. David Barton, who wrote a book in which he tried to argue that our founding fathers did not believe in separation of church and state. He has recently been dropped from the largest Christian publisher in the world because there were so many factual errors in his book. We need to have people who actually have training in their subject area, and so we need to listen to the scientists and the scholars who have studied their subject. We don't need to be coming in with our own personal agendas and our own private beliefs. People develop their own beliefs about origins and causes on their own, but we also need to listen to the scholars who are using what they can measure and what they can observe, and they're reporting that research to us.
Mr. Mercer, do you support teaching of evolution, global warming, and the Big Bang Theory as part of the science curriculum?
I get asked that question so often, and I remember editorial boards are saying that there's religion in our science standards, and I always said that I'd offer a $500 reward. You find me anywhere in biology, chemistry, physics, you find me God, Jesus, Mohammed, Buddha, whatever, and it's just not there. Those things are all taught. Every theory is taught. The biggest controversy that came from some of our friends from around the state, actually from out of state, who came and testified, was that they said several times that high school kids, ready for this, are unqualified to ask questions. And that was the dividing line. Unqualified to ask questions. And I don't know how many of y'all were talking to a bunch of kids and say, hey, I'm Dr. Mercer, I'm teaching this class, there'll be no questions because you're unqualified. That was outrageous. The fact is, we have all the science in there, there's no religion in there, we teach about, we don't teach creationism, we teach them about all the theories of evolution, micro and macro evolution, every step of that. But our kids in Texas have the freedom to ask, raise their hands, and ask honest questions in class. I've always stressed that if we don't allow our kids that freedom, then we're no longer living in a place called the United States of America. I would mention one thing about my friend Mr. Barton. He's probably one of the most acclaimed historians, but the company who had his book actually was bought by a secular publisher. The company actually had King James, the New King James Version. That secular publisher also went out and bought Zion, who had NIV. So now that secular publisher has the largest market, 70% of all Bibles, NIV, King James, and now they're coming out with a fictional Bible. So they're the ones that actually dropped them from that. And I would put, but in a small world, the largest publisher, I think, is Simon & Schuster, actually picked up Mr. Barton's book. But I would argue that because he was very clear, and his evidence was actual, and you see in his collection, actual letters, documents from Jane Addams, from Martha Washington, all the wives there, the husbands there, the founding fathers, and he would quote not what somebody said they said, but what the founding fathers actually said by their own writing. Thank you.
Mr. Loewe, do you support teaching of evolution, global warming, and the Big Bang Theory as part of the science curriculum?
Thank you. I'm fortunate to have good to excellent knowledge in many areas of mathematics, physics, chemistry, and engineering. Still, I'm not an expert in everything. And when considering proposals to change the curriculum or review textbooks, nevertheless, I can bring the knowledge that I do have, expert in some areas, to bear on areas that I might not, that I might have to come up to speed on. With regard to evolution, I'm convinced that evolution is a fact. That I won't have to be convinced much about whether evolution exists. That's not a problem. Global warming, I'm a skeptic. I would have to see a lot better data to be convinced that catastrophic global warming, man-made global warming, is occurring. And I note that over 30,000 American scientists, including over 9,000 who have PhDs, they signed a petition basically saying that catastrophic global warming is not human-made and is not occurring. Regarding the Big Bang Theory, that's the popular theory of cosmology today. However, earlier this year, in my studies of mathematics to apply to atomic hydrogen, I came across a theory of cosmology that is an alternative to the Big Bang Theory. It views our three-dimensional space as the surface of a hypersphere, a very big hypersphere whose radius is about 350 million light years, and the observed redshifts from distant galaxies are not due, in this hypothetical theory, to the fact that those galaxies are not due to the Doppler effect and the assumption that those galaxies are receding away from us, which would imply something like a Big Bang. Instead, the light from distant galaxies curves slightly around this sphere, and due to the curvature, that reduces the energy of the photons, causing redshift, without the need to assume that the galaxies are on the surface of the sphere are moving with respect to us. The guy who proposed this theory, Irving Siegel, he was a superb mathematical physicist at MIT. And he claims that that theory fits the observed data better than the popular Big Bang theory. I'm new to that, and I'm almost a novice now at that alternative theory, but I'm not an expert at it. I'd have to look into it in more detail. Thank you.
Mr. Loewe, what are your priorities for the State Board of Education?
To acquire low-cost math, science, and other textbooks for children to keep permanently. Garnet Coleman, a Democrat from Houston, and Kent Grusendorf, a Republican from Arlington, introduced bills into the Texas House based on my proposal in 2001 and 2003. Garnet Coleman in 2009 said that he would introduce anything I wrote on the subject. So I wrote a bill in 2009. That bill didn't have to receive a hearing. But I'm taking a more direct approach now, since it takes some persistence to try and get things done through the legislature. So that's one thing. To carefully oversee the permanent school fund, the fund of roughly $25 billion. As I noted earlier, I discovered errors of roughly $752 million in the values of two international investments listed in the schedule of investments of the fund. And that shows that my attention to detail, just basic attention to detail, could help the State Board to properly oversee the permanent school fund. That's another priority. I would lead the State Board of Education to promote school choice, especially progressive vouchers, which I devised roughly 25 years ago. Milton Friedman, Nobel laureate in economics, who, along with his wife Rose, introduced school vouchers back in the mid-50s, very much like my progressive variant of school vouchers. And I had a bill drafted in the Texas House during the 90s. However, at that time, the House was controlled by the Democrats and Speaker Pete Laney, who was a big voucher opponent. So those are just some of, and to improve the curriculum, especially in math and science, my specialties. One mathematics thing that I would like to expect high school kids to know is how to compute the volume of a parallel pipette, basically a three-dimensional version of a parallelogram, all six sides of which are parallelograms. The formulas to compute the length of a vector, area of a parallelogram, or volume of a parallel pipette are very, very important connections between algebra and geometry, and it's sort of the same formula when you go from 1 to 2 to 3 dimensions. There are similarities, so it's kind of a unifying formula that connects. It's a very important connection between algebra and geometry. Thank you.
Ms. Bell-Metereau, what are your priorities for the State Board of Education?
I would like to return some respect to the State Board of Education. We've really been the laughingstock of the nation with a number of the arguments that people have been having. I would like to see the State Board have a process that is fair to everyone. In the meetings that I've attended, I've seen them turn into a circus because some people are given their 3 minutes to speak, and then other people are allowed to talk on, and the board members themselves take the occasion to espouse what they believe, and it just turns into this very imbalanced, unfair process. So I believe we should stick to the rules in letting people speak so that everyone feels comfortable speaking. I was on Planning and Zoning Commission in San Marcos for 3 years, and I know how contentious meetings can be. But everybody has to just take a deep breath and really listen to each other and not feel like they're being disrespected because they're one ideology or one party or another. The board has to be impartial. We can't be there with our own ideology or our own agenda. I would also like to see the board take a leadership role with the legislature. If we go out and talk to the legislature and have people who really know education, telling them what are the best things to do with education, we might be able to turn Texas around. There are a lot of areas in which Texas isn't at the top, it's at the bottom. And we shouldn't put up with that. The final thing that I would like to be sure is that the permanent school fund is managed without any conflicts of interest. So that people who are on the board are there because they care about education. I've been a teacher all my life. I didn't go into it for the money, and I certainly wouldn't go on to the State Board of Education to give any favors to people who might have some reason that they want a particular scheme for the board or particular testing materials or teaching materials. We have to demand that our curriculum is rigorous and modern. For the English language arts curriculum, the board tossed out the work of teachers who had worked for over a year, and they substituted a teaching curriculum that they believed in that included phonics, which is from 50 or 60 years ago. We need to make sure that we have up-to-date ways of teaching, and we need to make sure that we are impartial, fair, and friendly on the Texas State Board of Education. So I hope that I will have your vote and that you'll tell friends, let's put more teachers on the Board of Education. Thank you.
Mr. Mercer, what are your priorities for the State Board of Education?
I have two things, the permanent school fund and parents. The permanent school fund, again, was set up by our founding fathers to ensure that every child has free textbooks or free educational materials. And we've grown that by law. We can never touch the principal of that fund. We have to grow the fund and use the interest in that to pay for books. And every year, our kids get free books. The problem with that is Representative Isaac mentioned earlier, there are some representatives, Democrats and Republicans, who want to take over that fund, as they did take away the teachers' retirement fund many years ago. Teachers used to get every year, retired teachers, they get cost of living 2 or 3% every year. And as Representative mentioned, like 12 years in a row, they didn't get a cost of living allowance. And then that's outrageous because all it changed was who's overseeing it now. It gave more power to the House and Senate. I tell you that because there are efforts now for the House and Senate to take over the permanent school fund. And that really scares me. Last session alone, there was an effort to take away $2 to $3 billion from the principal of what actually I call the children's fund. It's for our kids. To take away $2 to $3 billion from the principal of the fund, which is really dangerous because you may not know, the permanent school fund is $25 billion, but by law, we can guarantee up to $75 billion of bonding for our schools. That's why every school has a bond. Once you pass a bonding issue, it gets the lowest interest rate in the nation because it's protected, by that fund. The second thing is parents. I've been really shocked when I see moms and dads and their own personal treasure take their money and drive across Texas from El Paso or from Tyler, Texas, the Valley, Beaumont, to come and testify for that 3 minutes from the school board. And they would talk about things like, science and the right to ask questions, or even phonics or math or timetables or whatever history stuff. And to see them booed by what I call taxpayer-paid lobbyists in the audience, that was really shocking. And that happened on multiple occasions, again, a matter of public record by people who are in Austin, who are the experts, I don't know what, but I call them taxpayer-paid lobbyists. To see parents come up there, their customers to be booed, whether you're for or against them, whether they're north, south, urban, rural, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, that's wrong. That's wrong. It's moms and dads are the customers. We even had one retired teacher who got up and said, you know what? I'm going to speak for the parents. And the hammer came down and we said, if you boo again, we'll throw you out of this room. Well, the teacher started crying because as she left, some of these same people who were booing, the experts, the lobbyists, whatever, stood up and stuck their tongue out at her. Stuck their tongue out at a retired educator. That's the kind of thing that's got to change. And you hear the other side of the story, but unfortunately you don't hear this side. Parents are customers. They need to be listened to. They need to be heard. I get parents in Houston right now who are arguing about some of the books given that are in the 6th and 7th graders on health. Would be a good example of what we need to talk to parents more. Permanent school fund and parents, that's my two priorities. Thank you. And thanks for having us here today, too. Thank you.
And thank you, candidates, for the State Board of Education.